so it really comes into play with like complexity and long running ways of like handling something. So Zapier is a good example of this, or other automation platforms. Like, or if you had a human where you're like, step one, right? You might do step one. And then, if step one, then do step two, right? And then, ad infinitum. You can keep adding these. But like the more complex the process, and the more situations that might be encountered, the more complex this gets. Like even just in what appears on the surface to be a simple use case that we tackle, which is lemon law intake, right? Intake and onboarding of lemon law customers. If you look at the combinatorial math on that, like there are millions of permutations that a system might encounter. That system could be like a human system and our humans trying to understand what's going on, or a machine system. And so it's very difficult to plan a whole bunch of rules around that. If you want it to handle more and more and more autonomously, what you need is sort of like this orchestration and intelligence layer to be able to have essentially an emergent property. So rather than defining every absolute finite thing that needs to be done, instead, if you actually design more like a cognitive engine, which is the way Superpanel works, is we have this cognitive engine, and we teach the cognitive engine sort of about the world and what it needs to do, and about certain case types or situations it might encounter. And then there's an emergent property that happens. The system then behaves in a way that's sort of within the guardrails that we define, but it's an emergent property. We don't know exactly how it's going to behave. We give it some goals, and it makes its own decisions on how to execute that, which is different than sort of a step-by-step flow. And it's also different than, say, like a chatbot, where a chatbot's just one interaction versus multiple interactions over a long period of time. So what we have, and the way it works, is we have this, what we call internally a cognitive decision engine. This cognitive decision engine runs off of, we teach it about how to operate in a given environment. In our case, we work with law firms. So we teach it about how to operate in law firms. We call this a digital teammate externally, but this digital teammate or cognitive decision engine is given access to some tools. Let's just use a different shape here. Let's say, phone number, and let's say email address or inbox. Let's say we also give it access to CRM or a case management system. Maybe also some, document storage or management system. And we can add more, right? It can also be like a document signing tool, whatever. So we give it access to a number of tools. And then what we also do is we teach it about a given flow of work. So we give it some goals. So what we'll do, let me just add another one here, is we'll say, okay, so with these tools and capabilities up here, right, it has the ability to do interactions. It can do interactions over a phone call, over SMS, because it's got access to a phone. It can send emails. It can store documents, which means it has to process documents and know where to store them. It can update the CRM. It could use the CRM to decide what to say. Just with these tools, it can do a lot. There's a whole bunch of capabilities that it has. And so then what we do down here is we give it some goals and operating procedures of a given law firm. We define this in a workflow. We call these sequences, and each sequence has a start and an end. And the start might be something like, I'm mixing up my my shapes here. But let's make this a different color to delineate this a little bit. Let's make this blue. And so this might be check email, and if an email has a lead, start the sequence, right? So if someone emails in, or if there's a lead that comes in, it'll start the sequence. And then maybe the sequence has an end goal. Let's say the end goal is signed retainer agreement, right? And so in between, there's a lot that can happen. There might be a few different. So first off, we got to check the email. We might have to update a CRM, maybe not. We might have to send an email and have an interaction over email. It might be a separate interaction over SMS. There might be a phone call or two. There might be some questions. There might be some follow-up data requests. We got to collect, images or documents or things like that. If we use employment law an example, maybe we have to ask a bunch of questions over phone and email and maybe over SMS, and maybe there's a client portal where documents get uploaded to, or maybe those get emailed. And essentially, based on this goals and procedure, the system is independently deciding what it should do next and why it should do it. It's documenting why it should do it. So we can have an interaction. We can then have another interaction here. All of what's happening is based on what we call a situation. And so if we're talking to a person, we want to know what is their situation. And the situation can be defined using, 1,000 different data points or less, depends. Let's say 100 data points. Like these data points, if I just stick to the employment law example, it might be like what happened to someone, when did it happen, who did it happen with, what was the reaction, did they submit a complaint, is there a document evidence showing that submission of a complaint, is there a reaction to the complaint, who are the parties involved, what are the names of the parties involved. Like this gets long. There's hundreds and hundreds of data points. How much did they get paid? Who's the employer? Is this a government employer? Is it not a government employer? Whatever. And so what's happening is this cognitive decision engine, or this digital teammate, is constantly checking the situation and then going back and looking at its goals and operating procedures and then deciding what to do next in the context of the sequence. This is a digital teammate just autonomously moving along, deciding what to do. If at any point it gets confused, it'll escalate to a human. It'll ask for help, or it'll escalate and say, hey, someone on the team, can you handle this? I don't know what to do here. But essentially, we're trying to get the digital teammate to autonomously do all the things it needs to do across all the different systems, using all the different tools we've given it capabilities for, and get to an end state. And then once that end state is reached, and there could be other end states. There can be like, failed to sign a retainer, or like not qualified to sign a retainer, whatever it might be. We're trying to get to some end state. And this is very different than sort of chaining together a bunch of automations. It's very different than, like a chatbot that's a single interaction. This is multiple interactions that have interdependencies based on other data points and inputs from past interactions, or from interactions that maybe the human had with a person potentially. And so this is much more complex, and it lasts for much longer. And then you can have other sequences that sort of chain on top of this. Maybe once the retainer is signed, maybe a person comes in, reviews the retainer, maybe has a quick call with a new client, and then says, hey, welcome aboard. And then maybe there's more data that needs to be collected, and it gets passed back to the digital person. The digital person now runs off on another workflow to do the same thing. And maybe they're autonomously collecting more evidence for another month or two. It's really the complexity that separates, or the complexity handling, I should say, that separates Superpanel from, your average sort of chatbot, or like a voice AI product that sort of just does inbound answering and things like that. This is much more of like a digital teammate, is how it behaves and how it feels, how it shows up. And yes, technically it is agentic AI because it is all these steps, but that's how it's operating. We just thought it was simplest to call it a digital teammate because that's kind of how it shows up in our customer accounts.